Hi everyone, this is Carol Barlow at Conversation with Carol. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Happy Sunday and happy Father's Day to all fathers that are out there and mothers who are filling in for absent fathers. It's a wonderful day. And this is Conversation with Carol. And today we're going to be talking about cultural marriage, cross cultural relationships. So, for those of you that don't know, I am actually the product of a mixed relationship. My mum is Jamaican and my father is British. And as a child of a mixed race couple, I actually had some identity issues growing up. I was too white to be what was it? Too white to be black and too black, not black enough to God, you know what I mean. I'm not black enough to be in the black community, neither was I white enough to be in the white community. So I had a lot of challenges until I actually went to Jamaica for the first time and realized that Jamaica is a cooking pot. There's lots of people of all different shades and colors that call themselves Jamaican. So I was able to identify. So today we're going to be talking to Reverend Laurie Idahosa, a good friend and a fantastic mentor. I'm going to bring her in. She's already in the green room. So I'm really excited to invite her in. Hi. So good to
Hi,
see you,
how
Reverend
are
Laurie.
you?
I'm very well. You're looking amazing.
Thank you. So are you. Good to
Thank
see
you.
you.
How has Father's Day been today?
Wow, it has been a fantastic day. It we started at like 6 this morning.
Oh my.
My husband did the first service at church, the early service, and then I went to the headquarters church and I preached the second two services for him. And then he still preached the fourth service, then came
Oh
home
my
and we
goodness.
had a really big family Father's Day dinner. It was really fun. And literally we came right from that to this. So
Oh, welcome. Thank you for carving out time, and I'm very appreciative to Bishop Feb for allowing you to do this as well. So
oh,
today
I'm
we're
so sad.
talking.
He's actually doing a program with some people in Texas right now, so he doesn't even know what I'm doing.
I hope you're not going to be giving away any of his little secrets. So
Oh, am I?
you heard my introduction. We're going to be talking about cross cultural marriage, and
Yes.
um, and I also want to touch a little bit on the impact of cross cultural marriage on the children. I had a difficult time growing up, but my sister didn't. She's slightly darker than me, so she didn't have any challenges fitting in with the Black community in particular. But I'll come to that later because there's a question I want to ask you about that. So you have been married now, is it 14 years? Is it 14
No,
or
it'll
15
be
years?
18 years in October. Yeah, we were married in 2002.
Wow, congratulations. So,
Yay!
so my first question is, how did you, an American woman living in Delaware, I think, how did you meet Bishop Febb? How did you fall in love? And tell us the story.
Wow. Well, okay, so I first came to Nigeria when I was 11 years old. I came over on a trip with my family and I fell in love with it on my first trip. And
Right,
then after that, my father met my husband's father, Archbishop Benson Idahosa, and the two of them started collaborating on some projects and they became friends, or I would really say more of like a father-son relationship. My father-in-law became like a father to my dad. And
right.
so when I was 13, I came over with my parents on a missions trip. And my husband was actually, we stayed in my father in law's house, and my husband was in the room across the hall from me. He was much older than me, he was 14. But but
Wow.
we had a I don't know if I'm allowed to call it chemistry or love at first sight, but we had a
Wow.
pretty strong connection at 13 and 14. And then from there,
There's
we just really developed a strong friendship.
There's some that would just say it was puppy love, but clearly and evidently it wasn't just puppy love. So so you've known him since you were 13, and
Yeah.
you kind of had your I suppose teenage romance. But okay, so you came home and then what?
Well, we stayed friends. I think that was a big part of why we are where we are today. He
Mm,
came to the U.S. and he did his high school and his undergraduate and his graduate work in the States. And so it gave me an opportunity to see him quite a bit. And I was going back and forth to Nigeria. So we were just kind of seeing each other, whether in the States or in Nigeria. We would just kind of find a way that we would connect. We would write each other letters all the time, and I'd make the occasional phone call, because then it was long distance phone bills were an issue.
yeah.
So you couldn't make long distance calls without your parents' permission. Um, so we just kind of built a friendship over the years. And then eventually, I'd say it was, well, I know exactly when it was, March of 2002, he officially asked me to marry him. And then I became his wife in October.
So it was a very short courtship. So were you together
Well,
all of those years? Sorry, were you together all? No,
not
you
at
weren't together.
all.
Okay.
I was crazy about him and he was crazy about me, but it was a very impractical relationship. We liked each
Yeah.
other, but we couldn't really be boyfriend and girlfriend because we didn't see each other. We weren't,
Right.
in the same place, living in the same environment, and long distance just didn't make sense. So no, I had my boyfriends and he had his girlfriends. But whenever we would see each other, we would kind of do like a quick breakup. So whoever I was with, I would do a quick breakup. Whoever he was with, he would do a quick breakup, so that we could enjoy seeing each other for that week or weekend or whatever the case may have been. And then we would go back to our significant others after we saw each other. Yeah.
So when did that back and forth end? And you can say that you officially were dating just him, and then how did the marriage proposal happen?
Well,
And
it was September 11th of, what's that?
no, it's okay. Go ahead.
Okay, so it's September 11th of 2001. Um, it was that time that the World Trade Center whole issue happened in New York. And
Right.
my husband was living in Nigeria at the time. It was after his father had passed away. And so he was living in Nigeria, working in Nigeria, and he was flying into the US for a program. And unfortunately, the same time he was flying in was when the World Trade Center crash and terrorist attack happened. And so they rerouted his plane to Canada. So he called me from Canada and he said, I didn't even know at the time he was coming to America. But he called me from Canada. He said, can I come stay with you guys for a little while? My program's been canceled. We're like, sure, come. So he came and we spent a couple of weeks just hanging out, because the whole world was kind of on a standstill, similar to what it's been like during this lockdown.
Right.
And
Right.
so we just kind of hung out. And I remember one night he looked at me and he was just like, Laurie, I trust you. And I'm like, yeah, I trust you too. And he's like, no, like, I trust you. Why don't I marry you? And I'm like, yeah, I've been thinking that would be a fantastic idea for a long time. And
Wow.
then at that point, we started dating each other exclusively. And then we got married about a year later.
So let me ask a question, and again, I'm kind of referring back, I guess, a little bit to my own experience. When you were in that exclusive dating relationship, there must have been a whole wealth of conversation that goes on regarding when you get married, where you're going to live, what your children are going to look like, how you're going to raise your children. Did you have those conversations, or was it just a case of love is blind? I just want to be with this man. Let's just get married and work it out later.
Oh no, we totally had those conversations. Um, yeah, it was actually an interesting thing. You had asked me before how he asked me to marry him, and I think that was also part of those conversations, because I remember saying to him, like we were planning a wedding, but he hadn't asked me to marry him. And I'm like, hello, like we're talking about, when do we want to get married? What date? We're starting to plan our future, where we're going to live and everything. But you haven't put a ring on my finger yet. And he's like,
Wow.
in our culture, it's not a big deal. And I'm like, well, it is to me.
Right.
So he got a ring, and it was the sweetest night. It was in March of 2002, and there's a palm tree out behind the back of our house. Well, our now house. Then it was just a field, and he took me out to where the palm tree was, and it was muddy and it was raining, and I'm like, what are we doing outside? And he just said to me, he said, you know what, this is where I want to build my house. And I'm like, oh, that's a great idea. A house would be beautiful here. And he's like, well, and I'd like you to live in that house. And
Oh,
that's
how
when he put the ring
romantic.
on my finger. And yeah, and so we built the house around the palm tree. The palm tree still exists. It's right
Yeah.
outside our bedroom window. Yeah, so it's a nice
Oh,
little reminder of the commitment that we made from that early time. But yeah, we had lots of conversations. We talked about um, he was very straight with me from the beginning. Even before he officially made me his fiance, he
mm,
said, Laurie, if we are ever going to take this further, you have to agree that we're going to live in Nigeria for the rest
wow.
of our lives. And
Wow. Really?
yeah, it was a do or die. It was like, if we don't live in Nigeria, then we cannot get married. And I've always loved him, and I've always loved Nigeria. So I came over for like a little test trip where he pretended like I was a guest speaker at a conference,
Right.
and I wasn't really a girlfriend. And
Right.
so I came over on a little test trip, and we didn't tell anybody that we were dating, although everyone kind of figured it out. Um, and then he was like, okay, they like you enough. And I'm like, yeah, and I like them enough too. And so we decided to pursue it even further, and I made the commitment to live here.
Wow. So, okay. So, again, I'm reflecting back on 5 years ago when I first came to Nigeria, and I was much older than you were at that time. Um, when you knew that you were getting on that plane, to move, as you were walking up the steps or down the tunnel to get on that plane, how did you feel?
I was just excited to be married. I was just excited to marry Fab. Everything else was like, you know, like I just felt like
Yeah,
I could deal with whatever would come my way because I trusted Fab. I felt
right,
like I was safe with him. I felt like the relationship was solid enough that we could make it through whatever comes our way.
right,
And so I didn't do all that crying. I'm leaving America. Oh, life is going to be
right.
so hard. No, I was just excited. I was really excited, and that's all I could think about was the future.
So during that first year that you were married, you're now living in Nigeria and all of that, um, how did you balance the thing that you wanted with the things that you now missed? How did you balance that? What was your greatest challenge during that first year?
Honestly, the very first year was the most challenging year of our marriage
Right.
because I was very independent before I married into the Nigerian world. I
Mhm.
was a very headstrong, independent Nigerian American woman. I owned my
Yeah.
own houses. I had foster kids. I was living my world, living my life. And so I moved in, and I moved into the family house. Like I moved in to live in my mother-in-law's house, and she was in one room and we were in another room, and there was like another 13 rooms in the house with people I didn't know and didn't understand. Um and I felt like I went from having this very full life in America to now being relegated to four walls in a bedroom.
Right.
Because I wasn't at the time, I was told that I couldn't cook in the kitchen. I was told that I couldn't come downstairs without makeup on. I was given so many rules that I was just like, what have I gotten myself into? And I think that was a rude awakening, because I thought that everything was going to be just rosy, because I'm
Yeah.
with Beth. But it was tough. It was really, really tough.
How did you cope with that? How did you handle it?
I'd made a lot of phone calls back to America. A couple times I threatened to leave. A couple times I was like, look, I can't do this. Like, and I was living on peanut butter and jelly sandwiches because I wasn't into the food, and so I was losing all kinds of weight, which was apparently a bad thing in the Nigerian culture, because they want you to get fat when you get married. And here I was getting married. I was married in my first year, and I'm losing weight. The only like reprieve I had was exercise, because like I could go outside and exercise without makeup and without having to
Right.
be in a show. And so I was working out all the time, and I was just eating like literally what I could make in my toaster. Like, not even a toaster oven. I had a toaster in the bedroom, and I was just
Wow.
like, oh God. But my husband was extremely supportive. He
Mm.
was very, very, very supportive, and he stood up for me. He talked me down off the airplane.
Yeah.
He really helped me. He really helped me in that first year. And then we moved into our house. Our house was being built at the time, and that was a big part of what I was doing, was helping to build the house, working with the contractors. So once we moved into our house, I felt like I could finally breathe.
Right.
And then I didn't feel like we really started our marriage or started our life together until we moved into our own space. And
Mm.
I think that was part of living in Nigeria that I wasn't prepared for. I thought that the house was going to get built a lot faster, and then, or I thought that for sure
Nigeria.
we wouldn't live in the family house. I thought we would get an apartment while we wait, but I didn't know how complicated that would have been for
Right.
the only son of the Archbishop Benson Idahosa to move out of his house into an apartment. I didn't realize that that was a big deal.
A
And
big
so
deal.
it was quite a bit of adjustment,
Mm.
especially that first year.
I know when I first came, it was a similar sort of thing. The people that I was working for were a bit like that family, and I was
Okay.
staying on their compound, so nobody could come and visit. And if
Yes.
I wanted to go out, it's so where are you going? Who are you going to see? What are you going to be doing? What time will you be back? And by the way, you must travel from A to B with Mopo, with mobile police. And I had gone from being, and I was much more set in my ways even. I was very independent. I had my own car, I had my own home, and I was running around, running a business. And suddenly that claustrophobic environment, and I was
Yeah.
in that claustrophobic environment for 15 months. And eventually it was just too much. It was really, so I totally empathize with what you went through in that first year. But like you say, you had a very supportive husband, and you got your own home, and I guess that's fantastic. So that's fine. So now let's move on to you've now been married, and the next expectation is for children.
Yes.
But you had some struggles in that area, right?
Yeah, we did. We were told we couldn't have kids in the first year of marriage. The doctors told us that we were infertile, and between himself and myself, and so it was a big deal, really big
It's
deal.
a big deal
But
culturally. How? Wow.
yeah, in America, people don't care. Nobody asks. In fact, in America, when you get married, you're expected to go on birth control so you guys can live your life and enjoy your marriage, and you
Right.
know enjoy one another, and then later figure out when you want to start a family. But in
Yeah.
Nigeria, apparently, you're supposed to start a family right away. And that was a big
Immediately.
cultural adjustment for me. I wanted a family, but then when I was told that I couldn't have one, it was sad for me that I didn't feel like I had my own right again to choose. Now suddenly all the spotlights are on, and it's like, you've got to give us a child. And I'm not saying us meaning his family. His family was very kind to me. But the community in general had high expectations on us to have a child. And that was tough for me. But again, it was the support of having a really supportive husband that helped me through, or helped us through that season of waiting, which was several years. It took us about 6 years before we had kids.
And you eventually did. And I know in the meantime you lost one, but I don't want to necessarily go there because I want to focus on what we're talking about today. But his name was Ben, and I know as a result of losing Ben, you've started a maternity hospital, right? For women, and that's a fantastic legacy to leave. So you have your first boy, and you have your second boy, and then along comes another boy, and they are amazing children. They're fantastic children. They're wonderful product of two great people. When your boys came along, how did you? What measures? How are you raising them? In terms of obviously Feb is Nigerian and you're living in Nigeria and you're American, and the two cultures can't be further apart, really. Even more so, I would argue, than the British. The British, because we, colonize, because the British colonized Nigeria. There's a little bit of, but America and Nigeria, the cultures are so diverse. How did you begin to start raising your children, and how do you I suppose normalize that? How do you balance the two cultures, and have you and Feb had any challenges in raising your children? Have you had any challenges in the way you want to raise them versus the way he expects you to raise them?
Well, I think it was a decision that we made early on, that we weren't going to raise our children Nigerian and we weren't going to raise our children American. We were going to create our own family culture, and that was how we were going to raise our kids. So our kids were going to be Laurie and Feb Idahosa's kids. They weren't going to be Nigeria's kids. They weren't going to be America's kids. They're going to be our kids. And so we were very deliberate about our discussions, especially in the early times, about what, cultural differences as far as discipline, as far as prioritizing things such as education, even deciding whether or not our kids are going to identify as Black or they're going to identify as white, or they're going to identify as mixed. These are all the conversations that we had ahead of time, so that by the time the kids, because of course we had like 6 years of waiting, so we had lots of conversations while we waited. Absolutely. So by the time they actually started coming, we had worked out a lot of those things. And we honestly, we haven't had in 11 years now, well, he'll be 12 next month, our oldest. We haven't really had a cultural clash in terms of how to raise the boys, because we agreed ahead of time that it's going to be our family culture, and that we're going to have a family culture that really aligns with God's culture, with the culture of the Word, which unfortunately the Word culture is different than the African culture and is different than the American culture. So we chose to build a culture on the Word for our children, and that, God's Word, and that's what really helped a lot. And I think we've had a lot of understanding with each other because of that.
So I remember one of my first visits to Nigeria before I came. We went to visit someone. I didn't know them. I didn't know the family, but I know that the children were sort of ushered into the room, and suddenly the children went on their knees in front of me as the stranger in the room, and I was really, what are they doing? Why are they doing that? Obviously now I kind of understand that it was culturally appropriate and it was expected of them as a guest, to the country, as a guest to their home. It was expected of them to come and kneel. But I was so awkward with that. Do you teach those things to your children for the sake of the environment that they're in? You do?
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. When they greet my mother-in-law, for example, they kneel down, they greet her with the Benin greeting of Lage-san, which is a greeting that you would give to an elder. Um,
Right.
you know, when there's people who come into our home that demand that type of respect by virtue of their position or their age, and our
Right.
children know how to culturally honor the elderly. They know how to culturally honor elders in the family. They don't call anyone by their first name like they do in America, where my kid
Yeah.
could call you know my husband's sister by her first name.
Yeah.
That's not going to happen here. So they can't call my husband's sister by her first name. They have to use auntie.
Yes.
So yeah, we make sure that they're not being culturally offensive. That's for sure, and
Hmm.
that they know how to thrive in this kind of environment, and know how to give the honor to who honor is due and where it's expected. So yeah, they kneel down. I kneel down. I've had to learn to kneel down for certain people when I greet them, and that was
Sure.
a big adjustment at first because I'm like,
Yeah.
what, kneeling? What? Like
Why?
I it didn't just make sense to me at all. Like, what am I
Right.
doing on my knees?
Right.
But it's
But
something that, yeah,
it doesn't make sense, but it doesn't need to make sense to us. It's their culture, and out of respect, I guess that's what we do. I mean, I found myself doing the same sorts of things since I've been here as well. I want to move on to something that you said a little while ago. You said you mentioned your children about whether you define them as black, as white, or as mixed. And I want to refer back to a post that you recently made um, when the George Lloyd thing happened. And I remember in that post, it really reduced me to tears because you said, "Tonight I held my boys," and you. I can't remember the wording exactly, but I held my boys and I thought about what their lives are going to be like as black men, and the implications of that. Can you share your thoughts on that a little bit more?
yeah. So we be really careful with our kids that we don't really make our home about race. I'll be really honest. They don't see their mom as being white, and they don't see their
Right.
dad as being black. They see us as mom and dad.
Sure.
If you ask them what does my mom look like, the first thing they're gonna say is not she's white. Um,
No.
if you ask them what does your mom look like, okay, well she's a little bit taller than me. She's you know
Right.
because we very much de-emphasize race in our home. But I know that when my kids do go to America, when we spend our summers in the States, when they go to camp, for example, we find that it's the African American kids that identify with them more
Right.
than the Caucasian children, because
Right.
the African American children see them as black, and
Sure.
the Caucasians don't see them as white. They look at
Exactly.
them, the Caucasian community looks at them as like, well, you're black. Obviously, you're black. Well, no, they're just as much black as they are white. Um,
Right.
but you can just see that there's an identity with them that they're black in America. And
Right.
now that we're seeing so much with police violence, and we're seeing so much with racial profiling, which has been going on for a long time, but thankfully now the spotlight is on it. I believe that it kind of drove it home for me for the first time, really,
Mm.
where I realized that my kids will be perceived as black wherever they go,
Absolutely.
and they could
Absolutely.
be profiled, and they could be victims of this same type um, of uh, of of profiling and crime of the law enforcement against the black community if we don't do something about it, if we don't change
Right.
the laws, if we don't keep speaking out and making um, making the change that we need to make, then my own biological children could suffer from that, which I think was something that really kind of hit me for the first time, because we really just don't look at ourselves according to our race in our house. I'm mom and he's dad. I'm not white mom and he's not black dad. We're just mom and dad. And it's been interesting. It's been really, really interesting to think of it differently, and to feel as a white person that I have the responsibility to carry that baton, not just for what I believe is justice, but also for what I believe I want for my own children.
Yeah. And I think it's, I always think about this. In fact, I'm going to be talking to a colleague about this quite soon on an Instagram live. I do worry sometimes. We're not just now talking about interracial marriage, but Nigerian children, when they go to study abroad, they suddenly go from a world where there's tribalism, but that's a different thing. That's a different thing altogether. The first question people ask when they meet you is, where are you from? They want, there is that sort of stigma on tribe, but there's no racism as such here. There's not much racism that they will have experienced. And I wonder how well parents prepare their children before they go and study abroad, to understand that actually when you go there, you might be a prince in this land. You might be the son of a king, and people might, as a woman, as a girl, someone might carry your bag for you whilst you're here in Nigeria. But when you go there, you're just another black kid, and it's a challenge. Some people face really serious racism issues when they travel, and it can turn to depression, and it can turn to all manner of issues. So it is definitely a concern. So we're coming to an end. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I'm feeling a lot more relaxed now. So I know that you, again, something else I read on one of your posts is that you have often counseled couples either in a mixed, tribally mixed marriage, preparing for tribally mixed marriages, or mixed relationships, mixed as in black and white. And you've often said, don't do it. Why?
Yes.
Why?
Well, this is a lot of work. When you marry within your own tribe, when you marry within your own race, marriage is already a lot of work. Marriage is already, there's a lot of work in communication, adjustment, getting used to the new family. Marriage is already an extreme amount of work. But what happens is when you now become involved in a cross-cultural marriage or a cross-tribal marriage, you're adding an extra dimension that is putting a stress on your love, putting a stress on your relationship. And honestly, unless you're called to it, I tell people, it's not every battle that you have to fight. Just because you feel like you're in love with her or you feel like you're in love with him does not mean that both of you have to suffer your entire life under the stigma of, oh, she's Igbo and he's Yoruba, or he's Hausa and she's from Benin. Those things, when we find out that when people get married cross-tribally and cross-culturally, sometimes their families never accept the other race or the other tribe. And there's these unfortunate and very unfair beliefs. So, I faced it as a white person, being married to a Nigerian. People, when I first came to Nigeria, especially, and even now, there's this mentality that people have that white girls are loose, that white girls sleep with lots of men, and they don't believe in marriage. They divorce their husbands. Why? Because all the white girls in Hollywood are jumping from bed to bed to bed. And if you watch enough Hollywood movies and you see enough white girl boobies, then you're going to think that maybe she's just like these girls in the movie. Yeah. And it's a very, very unfair generalization that's been put on white women in this environment, where people think that we're not serious about marriage. we're not loyal, or we're very loose, we're very, they have all kinds of thoughts about white women. And I faced that quite a bit when I first came, that stigma. People are like, she won't last. She'll go back. She
Right.
won't stay. Why would she stay? Well, it's my marriage. Of course I'm going to stay. It's my home. Why would I leave just because of the color of my skin? It wasn't fair to me that people were constantly telling me that I was going to divorce my husband because I was white. And so I think there's a lot of unfortunate stereotypes that you have to fight as a white person coming into a black world, and also as a black person coming into a white world. I had people in America that have already judged Nigerian men in a certain way, and they've said, okay, Nigerian men are all 419, they're all crooks, they all steal, they have multiple wives, they won't stay faithful. There's all kinds of things that they've said about Nigerian men, which are just not true. There's some very fantastic Nigerian men, and my husband's one of them. But
he absolutely is.
But these generalizations, yes, he's a good man. But these generalizations are unfair, and there's a lot of tribal and cultural generalizations that are out there, and just a lot of people don't have thick enough skin to deal with the constant rhetoric. I mean, I've been here now for 18 years, and I still go outside to where maybe somebody doesn't know me or know our family, and a stranger on the street will shout out and call me Ohibo, Ohibo, which means white person. At first that was really disturbing to me, until I later said, you know what, I'm just going to have to accept that people are going to call me out by my color regularly. And I just have to say, you know what, I know who I am. I know why I'm here. I know that I'm not just, a lot of these stereotypes. So it's hard. It's hard when people marry cross-culturally, and when people marry cross-tribally. There are issues that they will have to deal with probably for the rest of their life. And it's not a battle that everybody has to face.
Right. So here's my question then. If you were to give, in conclusion, if you were to give 3 pieces of advice to couples that are considering getting married cross-culturally or cross-tribally, what would those 3 pieces of advice be?
Okay, the first, I would tell them to don't do it until you really, really know the person you're marrying. This is not an elope kind of situation where you feel all the attraction and you just run and get married. No, get to know, communicate, talk it all out, role play, scenarios, all of that. Make sure that you really know what you're doing before you get into it. And talk it. And when I say communicate, I mean communicate about everything. Communicate about child raising, discipline, where you're going to live. Talk, and have the really hard conversations. That would be the first piece of advice that I would give. The second piece of advice I would give is probably a little bit more controversial, and that would be to have parental consent. A lot of people say that, oh, it's my marriage, it's my life, I don't need, I'm just marrying for love. And when you're marrying cross-culturally and you're marrying cross-tribally, you're really marrying 2 families together. So it's important that both families are in agreement that the 2 of you should get married. And if, let's say, if my father, for example, wasn't in favor of me marrying Feb, I would have taken that into deep consideration. And I probably wouldn't have married Feb if I didn't have my dad's consent. And then my husband also had to get his mother's consent. He talked to his mom and he said, look, this is what I want. And I'm sure there was a time before I really came in the picture that she wanted something different for him. But it came to a point that she told him, she said, Feb, I want you to have what you want. So if this is really what you want and you really thought about it and you really think you can handle her and you really think that you want to be married to her, then you're on your own.
I like that phrase, handle her.
Can you handle Laurie? But yeah, she eventually gave her consent. And I'll be really honest, I would not have married Feb if his mother did not want me.
Right.
Because if I it's just such an uphill battle to now move to another country and then to be unwanted on top of
Absolutely.
moving to another
Yeah.
country, you know, where you've
Yeah.
left your father, your mother, your everything you know, and then you're also hated by your husband's family. Like, why would I put myself in that kind of prison? So that's what I encourage people to do is to really think through it, talk through it, and make sure that you have parental consent.
Great.
And then for the third piece of advice, I don't think I have a third piece of advice. If you're talking and you have parental consent, you're probably on the right track.
I'll give you the third one. Keep God at the center of
Of
everything you're
course.
doing. There you go.
Of course. I should have said that, Pastor Laurie. Well, that's for all couples. That's not necessarily just
Absolutely,
cultural.
absolutely, absolutely. Reverend Laurie, I am so appreciative of the time, of the sacrifice,
Thank you.
taking you away from your family on Father's Day of all days. I really do
Well,
appreciate it.
we are
And
totally
it's been
good.
so insightful. It's been absolutely wonderful talking to you as usual. And I can't wait till I can get on a plane and come to Benin and give you a big hug. Maintaining
Yes, I
social
can't wait
distancing, of
to.
course. It's going to be wonderful. Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you, everybody, that's been listening in. God bless you. This is Carol Barlow at Conversation with Carol, and this is Love, Life, and Relationships. Thank you, Reverend Laurie. Goodbye. Good
Thank you.
night.